The guard slammed the wheelchair back with a grunt, his voice rising above the storm. "Move along! This isn't a shelter! Nobody wants you here!" The little girl clutched the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. The rain soaked her thin dress, dripping down her face like tears she refused to shed. Her voice trembled. "Please, I'm not asking for a room, not even a bed. Just the doghouse! Let me sleep in the doghouse!" The guard sneered. "That space is cleaner than you'll ever be." He shoved her chair again, hard enough to rattle her fragile body, and that's when a voice broke the night. Calm, cold, dangerous. "Touch her again and you'll answer to me." The man who spoke was Daniel Sterling, a billionaire known for keeping his life locked behind gates and silence. Few had ever seen him outside the walls of his Beverly Hills estate, but tonight, under pouring rain, his shadow loomed behind the trembling child. If you stood there, watching a disabled girl beg for a doghouse instead of a mansion, what would you have done? Before we get into this story, please click the subscribe button, like and share this video, and tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. The storm hammered against the city, drowning the neon lights in sheets of silver. Behind the estate's towering glass walls, warmth and luxury glowed. But outside, on the wet pavement, a child sat alone in her broken wheelchair. Her name was Amelia, only 8 years old. Her legs had never carried her. Her life had never known comfort. Passed from home to home, abandoned more times than she could count, she had learned to ask for less than she deserved. That night, all she wanted was a roof made for animals. Daniel Sterling's world had always been one of power, order, and distance. But with a single plea, whispered in the rain, everything began to change. The rain had finally eased, leaving the world soaked and steaming under the soft glow of the estate's floodlights. The air smelled of wet earth and clipped hedges, sharp and clean, so unlike the trash-filled alleys Amelia was used to. She sat at the threshold of the doghouse, staring at it as if it were a palace. And in a way, it was. The structure was larger than most single rooms she had ever seen. Crafted from polished cedar wood, insulated walls, and even tiny heating vents, it was a canine mansion. Soft bedding lined the interior, and bowls of food and water sat neatly in their stands. One corner even held a toy basket filled with chewed ropes and rubber bones. Amelia's lips parted in awe. Her wheelchair squeaked slightly as she pushed herself inside. For a moment, she simply sat there, letting the warmth from the vents wrap around her chilled skin. To her, this wasn't a doghouse. It was a miracle. She brushed her wet hair away from her face and leaned forward, touching the plush bedding, softer than anything she had ever slept on. Carefully, she slid off her chair and lowered herself onto it, letting her cheek rest against the cushion. Her chest ached. She wanted to cry, but she had already learned that tears were wasted energy. Still, the thought whispered in her mind, fragile and unbelieving, "I'm safe tonight." From the main house, Daniel Sterling stood at his study window, a glass of untouched scotch in his hand. He watched the small figure through the rain-streaked glass, his jaw set in a line that betrayed nothing. It unsettled him, the way the girl had looked at him. Not with fear, not with awe, not even with the greedy hunger he was so used to from people wanting something from him. Her eyes had held only one thing: desperation. He sipped his drink, though it tasted like nothing tonight. "A child asking for a doghouse," he muttered. "In Beverly Hills." Behind him, his head of security lingered in the doorway. "Sir, do you want me to alert child services in the morning?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. His gaze stayed on the girl, now curled up inside the wooden house, pulling one of the dog blankets over her small shoulders. "Not yet," he said finally. "She can stay the night." The guard shifted uncomfortably. "Understood." When the man left, Daniel remained at the window, a shadowed figure in a house far too large for one man. Amelia's eyes fluttered shut, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. The storm outside had quieted, yet storms lived inside her still. Memories came in broken fragments. The smell of alcohol on her father's breath, the slam of a door when her mother left, the endless shuffle of foster homes that had no room for a girl in a wheelchair. Nights on the street, curled up against dumpsters, whispering to herself that tomorrow might be better. Tomorrow rarely was. Her small hands tightened around the blanket. "Don't get used to this," she warned herself. They'll send you away tomorrow, just like everyone else. But even as she thought it, warmth pressed against her, seeping into her tired bones. For the first time in months, sleep claimed her quickly. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the manicured lawns, glinting off the chrome gates. Birds sang in the hedges and gardeners began their work as if nothing extraordinary had happened the night before. Amelia awoke to the sound of soft paws. A golden retriever had padded into the doghouse, tilting its head curiously at the intruder curled on its bed. She sat up, startled, but the dog simply wagged its tail. Tentatively, she reached out and stroked its fur. The warmth of the animal's body grounded her, and for a fleeting second she smiled. "Sorry," she whispered to it. "I just borrowed your room. I'll be gone soon." "Not so fast," the voice startled her. She looked up sharply to see Daniel Sterling standing a few feet away, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Her heart hammered. She tried to sit straighter. I didn't mean any harm, mister. Thank you for last night. I'll go now." He raised an eyebrow. "Go where?" She faltered. Her lips parted, but no answer came, because there wasn't one. Daniel studied her in silence. The girl was painfully thin, her clothes wrinkled and damp from yesterday's storm. But her eyes, those stubborn eyes, met his without flinching. Finally, he crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to her level. "Why the doghouse? Of all the things you could have asked for!" Her voice cracked, but she spoke with the blunt honesty only children carried. "Because dogs are lucky. They have a roof. They're wanted. I just wanted to be lucky for once." The words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, he said nothing, then straightened and glanced toward the mansion. "You'll eat breakfast first," he said at last. Her mouth fell open. "Breakfast?" "Yes." His tone was matter of fact, leaving no room for debate. "I don't have starving children in my doghouse." And with that, he turned and began walking toward the house. Amelia hesitated, her small hands gripping the armrests of her chair. She didn't know whether to trust him, but she knew her empty stomach had already made the decision for her. With a soft push of her wheels, she followed him. The gates had opened, and for the first time in her life, Amelia was rolling toward a world that had always been locked away. Daniel debates internally as he leads Amelia into the mansion. Is this temporary kindness, or the beginning of something he cannot undo? The wheels of Amelia's chair squeaked against the marble as Daniel led her across the threshold of the Sterling estate. For a moment, the sheer size of the foyer stole her breath. The ceiling arched higher than the tallest building she had ever seen up close, lined with crystal chandeliers that threw fractured light across spotless floors. Every surface gleamed, every detail whispered of wealth so vast it didn't have to prove itself. And yet, it was quiet, too quiet. Her eyes darted around, trying to take everything in: the sweeping staircase, the oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, the row of polished doors leading to rooms she couldn't even imagine. Daniel noticed her expression but said nothing. He walked ahead, his shoes echoing with each step, the sound bouncing through the cavernous hall. To Amelia, the silence was heavier than the storm outside. "Do you live here all alone?" she asked, her voice tiny against the vastness. Daniel glanced back, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "With staff?" he said. "But yes, alone." The answer puzzled her. A house this big should have been bursting with life. Instead, it felt like a museum that had lost its visitors. As if to prove her point, a maid appeared at the far end of the hall, carrying a silver tray. She froze when she spotted Amelia. Her eyebrows shot up, and without a word, she disappeared into another corridor, no doubt rushing to whisper the news to the others. Breakfast was laid out in a dining hall, big enough to host a small army. The tables stretched the length of the room, polished wood reflecting the glow of candelabras. Daniel took his seat at one end. Amelia wheeled herself hesitantly to the middle, unsure where she belonged. Finally, she parked herself close enough to smell the food, but far enough to leave space between them. The spread before her was unlike anything she had seen outside of a bakery window. Bowls of fresh fruit, baskets of pastries, plates of smoked salmon and eggs, and juices lined up in crystal glasses. Her stomach growled so loudly she winced. "Eat," Daniel said, without looking up from his tablet. She hesitated, then reached for a croissant. She bit into it, her eyes widening as buttery flakes melted on her tongue. For a moment, she forgot to be cautious. She forgot to hide her hunger. She devoured it as if it might vanish. When she finally noticed Daniel watching her, she froze. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He tilted his head slightly. "Sorry? For eating?" She lowered her gaze. "People don't like it when I take too much." Something tightened in his chest, though his face betrayed nothing. He set down his tablet. "You're not people. You're a guest." Her brows knitted. "Guest?" "Yes." His tone was clipped, as if he didn't want to discuss it further. But the word lingered in the air, settling into her fragile heart. Later, Daniel retreated to his study, but his thoughts refused to stay with the numbers on his screen. The image of the girl at his table, chewing like it was her first real meal, kept returning. Why had he let her in? He told himself it was temporary, a moment of weakness during a storm. Tomorrow he'd call child services. Tomorrow he'd return to his orderly life. But the words she had spoken at the gate gnawed at him. Because dogs are lucky. They have a roof. In a house filled with every comfort, why did those words feel like an accusation? Meanwhile, Amelia explored the room she had been allowed into, the smallest guest room, though to her it felt grander than a palace. She touched everything with reverence. The thick curtains, the soft bedspread, the lamp that flicked on with the press of a switch. She moved cautiously, afraid that at any moment someone might scold her for touching what wasn't hers. Her fingers traced the edge of a photo frame on the nightstand. It held the picture of a smiling woman with kind eyes, her hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. Amelia tilted her head. "Your wife," Daniel's voice said from the doorway. She turned quickly, caught. "She looks nice." She was. His tone was flat, too flat. He stepped inside, set a folded blanket on the chair, and left again without another word. Amelia stared at the photo a moment longer. She didn't know why, but she whispered softly, "I think he's lonely without you." That evening, Clara Sterling arrived. Daniel's sister swept through the hall like a storm of perfume and polished heels. She barely paused before demanding, "Why is there a child in your house?" Daniel closed his laptop. She needed shelter. Clara's eyes flicked toward Amelia, who sat quietly in her chair near the fireplace, clutching a mug of cocoa with both hands. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Shelter? Daniel, you can't just bring strays in from the street. You're a Sterling. People will talk." "Let them," he replied coolly. Clara's voice dropped. "You know how fragile your reputation is after." She trailed off, glancing at the picture of his late wife on the mantel. After everything, Amelia pretended not to hear, but her grip tightened on the mug. Daniel's jaw flexed. "I won't throw her back onto the street." Clara sighed dramatically. "One night, then. But for your sake, make sure it ends there." She left in a rustle of silk, the sound as sharp as her words. Amelia looked at Daniel, her eyes uncertain. "Am I trouble for you?" For once, Daniel didn't have an immediate answer. He stared into the fire instead, the flames reflecting in his eyes. That night, as Amelia was tucked into the guest bed, she whispered into the darkness, "Do you eat alone every night?" Daniel, who lingered by the door longer than he intended, froze. "Yes," he admitted quietly. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "That's sad." Her words were innocent, but they landed heavier than anything his sister had said. Daniel stood in the doorway, silent, the crackle of the fire filling the pause. When he finally left, Amelia's whisper followed him down the hall like an echo he couldn't escape. "What would you do if you were Daniel? Would you send Amelia away for the sake of your reputation? Or let her stay, knowing it could change everything? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts." Daniel lies awake in his vast, empty bed, replaying Amelia's words. "That's sad!" For the first time in years, he begins to wonder if his wealth has bought him comfort or a prison. The storm eased into a drizzle by the time Daniel stepped out onto the stone path, his umbrella tilting toward Amelia. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, the night still charged with the weight of what he had just heard. A billionaire, standing in front of his gates, a little girl in a wheelchair, asking not for riches, not even for a bed inside, just the doghouse. Daniel crouched so he could meet her eyes directly. "Why the doghouse?" he asked softly. Amelia's tiny shoulders lifted. Her voice was hoarse from crying, but steady. "Because dogs are treated better than me. At least they get food and a roof." The words hit Daniel like a blow. He looked back toward the sprawling mansion behind him. 10 bedrooms, glass walls, empty spaces echoing with silence. All his wealth, all his empire. And this child was begging for scraps meant for animals. For a moment, his instinct was to say yes. Let her have the doghouse. At least it was shelter. But something inside him rebelled. He had worked his whole life to build a fortress against the cruelty of the world. Yet here was living proof that cruelty always found its way through the cracks. Would he really let her live in a doghouse, just beyond the glow of his luxury, while he dined under chandeliers? The thought made his stomach twist. "Listen, Amelia," he said finally, steady but firm. "You're not sleeping in a doghouse. If you're under my roof, you'll be treated like a human being. Do you understand me?" Her wide eyes blinked up at him. "But people don't keep me. They always send me away." Before Daniel could reply, the guard cleared his throat. "Sir, this isn't wise. You don't know her, her history, nothing. People talk. A billionaire taking in some random..." Daniel's head snapped toward him. "Do I look like I care what people say?" His voice dropped lower, sharper. "Open the gate." The guard hesitated, then slowly stepped aside, pressing the button that made the massive iron gates groan open. The marble floors gleamed as Daniel wheeled Amelia into the grand hall. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, lighting her awestruck face. She looked more frightened than comforted, as though she'd stepped into a dream she wasn't allowed to touch. "Don't worry," Daniel said gently. "No one's sending you away tonight." Still, he caught the doubt in her eyes, doubt born of too many broken promises. And as he pushed her chair past portraits, wide staircases, and gilded doors, Daniel knew this was no simple act of kindness. This was a turning point. For her, for him, for both their lives. If you were in Daniel's place, would you really bring a complete stranger, a child, into your home, or would you play it safe and walk away? And Amelia's request, begging for a doghouse instead of a bedroom, doesn't that say more about the world she came from than about her? What do you think it reveals? The night stretched on, but sleep never came easily to Daniel. Even after showing Amelia to a guest room, warm blankets tucked under her chin, her wheelchair set beside the bed, his thoughts refused to rest. He sat alone in his study, glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, staring at the flames curling inside the fireplace. The rain outside had stopped, but inside him, a storm was raging. Why her? Why tonight? Why did a child's plea for a doghouse tear down the walls he had built for decades? Few people knew Daniel's story. The world saw the billionaire mogul, the ruthless dealmaker who bent markets to his will. But beneath that success was a childhood carved out of pain. He too had once stood outside iron gates. He too had begged for a chance. And he too had been turned away, more times than he could count. His father, a factory worker broken by debt, had vanished before Daniel was old enough to remember his face. His mother worked 3 jobs until exhaustion stole her life. By the age of 9, Daniel was an orphan with no roof over his head. He remembered the cold nights under highway bridges, the dogs he envied because they had masters who fed them, the houses he passed glowing with light while he pressed his face to the rain-streaked glass. And tonight, Amelia's words had ripped open those memories like an old wound. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, eyes closing for a moment. He saw her again in his mind, the small fists gripping the armrest, the desperate steadiness in her voice, the heartbreaking logic of her request. Amelia wasn't just some stranger. She was a mirror, a reflection of the boy he once was. That terrified him more than he cared to admit. Down the hall, Amelia stirred in her sleep. She dreamed of shadows and voices telling her she didn't belong. Then, for the first time in years, she dreamed of light, a warm fire, a steady hand guiding her chair. Meanwhile, Daniel rose from his desk and walked toward her room. He paused at the door, watching her small frame breathe softly under the covers. "This won't be easy," he whispered to himself, "but neither was mine." And in that moment, he made a decision. She wouldn't just stay in his house for the night. He would fight for her, protect her, give her what no one had ever given him: security, dignity, and a chance at life. Do you believe people with painful pasts become harsher or more compassionate when they see someone going through the same struggle? If you were Daniel, would Amelia's plea remind you of your own scars, or would you try to block out the memory? And most importantly, do you think this decision will heal him or destroy him? The next morning, sunlight spilled across the marble floors of Daniel Sterling's mansion, but peace was a fragile illusion. Amelia had awoken early, rolling herself to the windowsill. She pressed her palms against the cold glass, watching the fountain spray arcs of water into the morning air. Her eyes sparkled for the first time since she'd arrived. This is beautiful," she whispered. Daniel stood behind her, quiet, letting her take it all in. He had never shared this view with anyone, no friends, no family, and now it belonged to her too. But the mansion had its own heartbeat, and its staff murmured like leaves in the wind. The girl? She's only 8. What is he thinking? Do you think he's losing it? Someone's going to call the authorities if this keeps up. Daniel heard every word, but for the first time, he ignored the gossip. His focus was Amelia's small smile as she pointed out the swans in the pond, the hummingbirds at the garden's edge. Just as Daniel thought they might have a quiet morning, the first sign of trouble appeared. A luxury car rolled up the driveway, tires crunching the gravel. Out stepped Clara, his sister, sharp and poised, but her eyes sharp as daggers. "Daniel," she said, voice smooth but cold, "we need to talk about her." Amelia turned, confused. She hadn't heard the whispering staff, but she sensed tension, a shadow darker than the mansion's walls. Clara didn't wait. "This isn't charity. You can't just take in any child from the streets. People will talk. Laws will be complicated. You could ruin yourself, your empire." Amelia's tiny voice piped up. "I'm not ruining anyone. I just wanted a roof. That's all." Daniel felt his chest tighten. The courage in her words mirrored the boy he once was, and the man he had become. As Clara left with a warning, another problem appeared: social media. A staff member's quick snapshot of Amelia in the doghouse, captioned "Billionaire's unusual guest," had gone viral overnight. Comments flooded in: admiration, curiosity, skepticism. Headlines questioned Daniel's motives. Some accused him of exploiting her. Daniel watched the screen, fists clenched. But Amelia shrugged, a small, determined smile. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm safe with you," she said. Amid the chaos, Daniel and Amelia found tiny islands of peace. Breakfast together, where Daniel asked her favorite foods. Wheelchair races through the garden paths. Laughter echoing through halls that had long been silent. Each moment softened the billionaire's edges, reminding him that life wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. But peace was fleeting. Amelia's past had not forgotten her. Strange men in the nearby streets, watching the mansion. A note slipped under the gate. "She belongs to us." Daniel's instincts, honed in boardrooms and danger alike, warned him that this was just the beginning. He knelt beside Amelia, whispering, "Whatever happens, I won't let anyone take you from me. Do you understand?" Amelia nodded, gripping his hand tightly. "If you were Amelia, would you trust Daniel fully, even with the world questioning your presence? Do you think Daniel's wealth and influence are enough to protect her, or will outside forces challenge them in ways money can't fix? What would you do if you were in Daniel's shoes, facing threats from both the past and public scrutiny?" The mansion was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt fragile, as if it could shatter with the slightest disturbance. Amelia had fallen asleep by the window, the moonlight tracing patterns across her small frame in the wheelchair. Daniel had insisted she sleep in the main house now, despite her initial protests. He wanted her close, always close, in case danger came. He hadn't anticipated how quickly that danger would arrive. A low hum reached his ears, a sound foreign and deliberate. He froze, straining to hear. At first, it was subtle, the crunch of tires against gravel, a shadow sliding across the garden. Then came the faint click of a gate latch. Daniel bolted from his room, heart hammering. "Amelia!" His voice cut through the halls, sharp and urgent, but there was no answer. In the courtyard, masked men moved with precision, working quickly to secure her wheelchair. Amelia, half asleep, barely had time to register the struggle. One of the men grabbed her, and she yelped, the sound small but fierce. Daniel's blood ran cold. He ran faster than he had in years, muscles tensing with the adrenaline that only true fear could summon. By the time he reached the gate, the van's headlights were already retreating into the night. Amelia struggled against her captors, defiance flickering in her eyes despite the terror. "He will come for me," she screamed, her voice cracking. The The words echoed off the mansion walls, carrying a promise Daniel intended to keep. Inside the van, Amelia's mind raced even as the men tried to frighten her into silence. She memorized their faces, the tattoos peeking from beneath sleeves, the rhythm of their speech, the smells in the confined space. Every detail became ammunition. She had survived on the streets. Survival was instinct, and instinct now guided her every thought. Meanwhile, Daniel contacted the police, but frustration gnawed at him. Time was slipping away. They were slow, cautious, and every second mattered. His wealth and influence were useless here. He had to act. He felt a hand on his shoulder, the familiar grip of Clara beside him. For the first time, she offered more than criticism. "You can't wait for them to come to you," she said. "You have to go to her." With a nod, Daniel grabbed his coat and followed the trail, tracking the van through winding streets and dark alleys. The city was silent around them, as though it held its breath, watching the unfolding chase. In the warehouse district, the van screeched to a halt. Daniel approached carefully, senses alert, every muscle coiled. The kidnappers emerged, confident, assuming their victim was powerless. Amelia's small figure, however, had other plans. "Leave me alone!" she shouted, standing tall despite the terror in her chest. Her eyes darted to details, the position of the crates, a loose chain hanging from the ceiling, the way the leader adjusted his mask. Each observation became a tool, and with sharp timing, she used a crate to block a path, tripping one of the men. A chain swung, narrowly missing another, creating chaos. Daniel seized the moment, rushing in with calculated force, striking with precision and pulling Amelia close. She clung to him, her courage shining through the tears. "I knew you'd come," she whispered, relief washing over her in a tidal wave of emotion. Police sirens grew louder, approaching the warehouse. The kidnappers realized their plan had collapsed. They fled into the shadows, leaving Daniel and Amelia in the quiet aftermath, adrenaline still surging, hearts pounding. Daniel held her tightly, whispering, "I promised I'd protect you. No one touches you, ever again." Amelia nodded against his chest, feeling a bond deeper than anything she had ever known. Yet even as they returned to the mansion, Daniel's mind raced. This had been a warning, not an isolated event. Amelia's past would not surrender so easily, and he knew the next challenge was already waiting, unseen, lurking beyond the gates. Amelia looked up at him, her small hand brushing against his. "You saved me," she said softly, "but will they come back?" Daniel's eyes darkened, a mix of resolve and unease. If they do, they'll regret it, and this time they won't get away. The mansion was quiet again, but this time the silence held vigilance. Daniel and Amelia had survived, but their journey was far from over. Outside forces had revealed themselves, and the fight to keep her safe had only just begun. The night had tested them both, yet it had also forged something unbreakable. A promise, a bond, and the understanding that together they could face whatever darkness awaited. The morning sun barely pierced the mansion's heavy curtains. Inside, Daniel moved like a man awake but not fully alive, haunted by the memory of last night. Amelia sat in the wheelchair by the window, staring out at the city below, her small fingers tracing the frost on the glass. Neither spoke for a long moment. Words felt inadequate. Then Amelia turned, her gaze steady and unwavering. "They'll try again, won't they?" Daniel knelt to meet her eyes, gripping her hands. "If they do, I promise I'll never let them take you." But promises, no matter how fierce, could be tested in ways neither of them had imagined. The phone rang, breaking the fragile calm. Daniel picked it up, and the voice on the other end made his stomach twist. It was Amelia's father. "You think you can keep her?" The man sneered, venom dripping from every word. "She belongs with me. Pay what I want, or I'll see her back in my home. You can't buy her happiness." Daniel's hand clenched around the receiver. Money had never mattered more. And yet, in the face of a father's legal claim, even his billions seemed powerless. "You'll get nothing," he said, voice tight. "She stays with me. She's my daughter now." Amelia's eyes widened. She had feared this moment, the threat that her past could return. "What does he mean?" she asked softly, voice trembling. Daniel wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "It means we're going to the courthouse. I'll fight for you. All the way." The courtroom was cold and sterile, the kind of place where hearts were measured against paper and law, and the weight of authority pressed against every soul. Reporters crowded the halls outside, Cameras flashing, whispers following every step. The world had begun to notice Amelia's story. A disabled girl, saved from the streets by a billionaire, and now the subject of a legal storm. Inside, the judge presided over the case with quiet authority, scanning documents, listening to testimonies. Amelia's father presented his argument first, his voice smooth, polished, convincing on the surface. "She is my child by birth. You cannot ignore biology." Daniel's lawyer countered, presenting evidence of Amelia's well-being under Daniel's care. Medical records showing her progress, testimony from caretakers, and details of her safety and happiness since the kidnapping attempt. The tension in the courtroom thickened with each word. Amelia sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, but her mind raced. Could she speak up? Could she make the choice she had already made? She glanced at Daniel. He gave a small nod, silent encouragement, as if saying, "This is your moment." The room held its breath as Amelia rose. Her small wheelchair didn't diminish her presence. If anything, it magnified it. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I want to live with Mr. Daniel. He's my dad. He's the one who protects me, who cares for me. I don't want to go anywhere else." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Cameras clicked. Even the judge paused, meeting Amelia's eyes with a mixture of surprise and solemnity. The words were simple, but their weight was immense. This was her choice, her voice rising above the clamor of law and money. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. Every sleepless night, every fear, every moment of doubt, all of it had led here. He squeezed her hand gently. "I hear you, Amelia. I'll never let you down." Testimonies followed, each one reinforcing the bond between Daniel and Amelia. Clara, once skeptical, now spoke passionately in support of the adoption, recounting moments she had witnessed, the laughter, the care, the unwavering attention Daniel gave to a child the world had overlooked. Hours passed like minutes, and finally, the judge leaned forward, pen in hand, eyes fixed on the papers before him. In light of the child's wishes, the evidence presented, and the best interests of the child, this court grants the adoption. A silence fell, broken only by Amelia's soft gasp. Daniel's eyes filled with tears he had held back for so long. "You're mine," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Amelia smiled, a radiant light in the courtroom, finally free from fear. Outside, the press erupted. Cameras flashed, microphones waved, and the story spread like wildfire. Billionaire adopts disabled street child. Some called it heartwarming, others cynical, questioning the billionaire's motives. Daniel didn't care. Amelia was safe, and that was all that mattered. As they walked out of the courthouse, hand in hand, Clara followed, smiling and finally at peace. Amelia looked up at Daniel, her eyes sparkling. "I asked for a doghouse, and now—" She paused, searching for the words. "Now I have a home. A real one." Daniel chuckled, a deep, relieved sound. "And we'll make it better than anyone could imagine. Together." That night, as they returned to the mansion, the city lights twinkled like 1,000 tiny promises. Amelia's journey had been perilous, filled with fear and uncertainty, but it had also revealed something greater. Love, protection, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. Even as the world buzzed with speculation and the story spread across headlines, one truth remained unshakable. Amelia was home, and Daniel would move heaven and earth to ensure it stayed that way. But deep inside, Daniel knew the story wasn't over. The dangers of the past could resurface, and the world would continue to watch, waiting for the next twist. For now, though, they had won a battle, a hard-fought victory, and Amelia had her father. The mansion was quiet again, the kind of quiet filled with relief and anticipation. They had survived the storm outside and the storm within. Together, they would face whatever came next. The morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the mansion, painting the grand halls in a warm golden glow. Amelia rolled slowly down the corridor, her eyes wide with excitement. Today was different. Today, she wasn't just Daniel's daughter in name. She was about to step into a life that promised safety, care, and a future she had never dared to imagine. Daniel watched her from the doorway, a mixture of pride and awe swelling in his chest. Every scar, every fear, every sleepless night they had endured together had led to this moment. "Ready?" he asked gently. Amelia nodded, her small hands gripping the wheelchair handles. More than ever. Their first stop was the clinic. where therapists and doctors had been working tirelessly to help her strengthen her muscles and improve her mobility. Over the months, Amelia had endured painful therapy sessions, late-night exercises, and countless frustrations, but she had never given up. Today, she was ready for something extraordinary. With Daniel at her side, she took the first unassisted steps, wobbly but determined. Each movement drew gasps from the staff, cheers from the nurses, and tears from Daniel. "You're walking," he whispered, voice cracking. "I knew you could do it." Amelia's smile was radiant, triumphant. "We did it," she corrected. "You and me." Back at the mansion, the preparations were underway for the launch of the Doghouse Foundation, a project Daniel had envisioned since the day Amelia had begged to stay in his doghouse. The foundation would provide shelter, care, and medical support for disabled and abandoned children like Amelia, who had been overlooked by the world. The grand hall was filled with reporters, philanthropists, and dignitaries. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, and questions hung in the air. Yet, Amelia's eyes were focused only on one person, Daniel. As she stepped up to the podium, her voice clear and confident, she addressed the crowd. "I asked for a doghouse. No one listened, but now, thanks to my dad, I have a home. Every child deserves the same chance to feel safe, to feel loved, and to have hope. The Doghouse Foundation will make that happen." The applause was thunderous. Daniel, standing behind her, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey that had started with fear, hunger, and danger had transformed into something extraordinary. They had taken pain and turned it into purpose. Clara joined them on stage, placing a supportive hand on Amelia's shoulder. "You've inspired all of us," she said softly. Amelia's eyes shone with gratitude, her courage and resilience radiating through every word and movement. As the foundation officially opened its doors, children arrived, some in wheelchairs, others clutching worn toys, all with hopeful eyes. Amelia greeted them with warmth, her story becoming a beacon for everyone present. She knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, and now she had the power to change that. Daniel watched her interact with the children, laughter spilling into the halls, and he finally allowed himself to relax completely. Every fear he had carried, of responsibility, of public scrutiny, of failure, melted away. Amelia had not only survived, but had thrived, and together they were building something enduring. Later, as the day wound down and the hall emptied, Daniel and Amelia returned to the mansion's balcony. The city sparkled beneath them, lights reflecting off the water, echoing the life they had created together. Amelia leaned against Daniel, her voice soft. "I never thought a doghouse could lead to this." Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sometimes, the smallest place holds the biggest miracles." She hugged him tightly. "Thank you for seeing me, for fighting for me." "Always," Daniel replied, tears welling in his eyes. "Always." The mansion was finally filled with laughter, warmth, and the feeling of family, something Daniel had not known in years. Amelia's journey from the streets to safety had been harrowing, but it had forged an unbreakable bond between them. They were no longer just a billionaire and a girl in a wheelchair. They were father and daughter, partners in life, and champions for those who had been overlooked. As the sun set, casting the final golden rays across the city, Daniel reflected on the journey. The doghouse, once a symbol of desperation, had become the cornerstone of hope, resilience, and love. And Amelia? She had become everything she had dreamed. Strong, brave, and unstoppable. Every child she touched through the foundation would know the same truth she had discovered. Home is not just a place. Home is love, protection, and someone who believes in you. The night fell quietly over the mansion, yet inside, hearts beat with joy, determination, and a sense of purpose. Daniel and Amelia had not only survived the storms of the past, but had created a legacy that would shine for generations. Amelia looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper, but full of certainty. "I asked for a doghouse, and you gave me a home. Let's make sure every child gets the same chance." Daniel nodded, holding her hand tightly. "We will, together." And so, from a night in a doghouse to the launch of a life-changing foundation, their story came full circle. Proof that compassion, courage, and family could transform even the darkest circumstances into a legacy that would endure forever.